The chamber trembled with tension the moment Netanyahu's voice cracked through the hall, sharp and frantic. "Stay out of our war," he barked, jabbing a finger toward the African delegation as if he were trying to command the world instead of plead with it. Cameras snapped, ministers whispered, and the air grew tight, because everyone knew who he was really shouting at. Not diplomats. Not envoys. Traoré. Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even shift in his seat. Instead, he slowly turned his head and met Netanyahu's glare with the steady, unbroken calm of a man who has stood through storms far greater than words. His silence alone was louder than Netanyahu's entire outburst. Across the hall, officials from Europe leaned back, watching like spectators at a fight they couldn't control. The U.S. delegation stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or pretend neutrality. Even the media crews lowered their voices. The kind of hush that falls right before history changes direction. Netanyahu continued, louder this time, desperation leaking between each syllable. "This is our security, our land, our fight. You can't lecture us, you don't understand what we face." Traoré finally rose. But he didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't gesture. He simply stood the way a soldier stands, spine straight, shoulders set, gaze locked, bearing the weight of a continent without needing to say so. When he spoke, the hall froze. "Before I speak of war," Traoré said, his tone cutting through the room like steel meeting stone, "answer one thing, Netanyahu." He took one step forward. "Why are children dying?" The question exploded like a grenade, silent, but lethal. Ministers looked away. Reporters paused mid-recording. Even Netanyahu's own advisors shifted uncomfortably. The Israeli Prime Minister's jaw tightened, but the words he tried to summon refused to form. Suddenly, he was the one on the defensive. Traoré continued, voice rising only enough to make sure every corner of the room heard him. "You shout about war," he said, "but war is fought between armies, not on the bodies of the innocent. Not on the rubble of schools. Not on the graves of families." His eyes pierced Netanyahu like a spotlight revealing a crime. "So before you demand we stay out, stop killing children first." A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. Some applauded quietly. Others stared, stunned. Netanyahu's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it again, realizing every camera was now zoomed in on him, on his silence. Traoré didn't wait for a response. He simply finished. "Africa is not silent anymore." The chamber had barely recovered from Traoré's first words when Netanyahu lunged forward again, voice cracking with rage. "You know nothing about this region," he barked, jabbing a trembling finger toward him. "Stay out of our war. You're interfering where you don't belong." But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even lean back. Instead, he let a slow breath leave his lungs, the kind a soldier takes right before deciding whether an enemy is actually worth responding to. Then he spoke, calm enough to silence half the room. "You call it your war," Traoré said, his tone steady, almost surgical, "but the victims aren't yours. The mothers burying their children aren't yours. The bodies under the rubble aren't yours. Gaza is bleeding, and all you can say is, stay out?" His eyes narrowed, sharp as the steel of a bayonet. "Then stop killing children first." Netanyahu froze. The room didn't. Diplomats shifted. Some swallowed hard. Others hid their faces behind papers, pretending not to witness what everyone knew was happening. A leader from West Africa had just said out loud what dozens of countries had whispered privately for months. Traoré leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, just enough to make the distance between them feel suddenly very small. "You want me out?" he continued. "Then stop doing things that force the world to pay attention. Because every time a child dies, every time a school collapses, every time a refugee camp is shredded by missiles, it becomes everyone's war." Netanyahu tried to speak, but whatever words he had prepared dissolved under Traoré's stare. Traoré continued, voice low, deliberate. "Africa knows what injustice looks like. We lived it for centuries. And we learned something you seem to have forgotten: when a powerful nation begins killing the powerless, the world has the right, no, the duty, to intervene. A diplomat from Europe muttered something under his breath, something about this getting out of control, but Traoré ignored it. His focus was locked on one man. "You don't get to lecture us about war," he added. "Not when the smoke from the latest strike is still rising over children's bedrooms." Several cameras zoomed in. It was clear now, Traoré wasn't just criticizing policy. He was confronting a worldview, one Netanyahu had never been challenged on so directly, so publicly, so devastatingly. Netanyahu's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, and that silence, heavy, stretched, trembling, belonged to Traoré. The room froze the moment Traoré stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the polished conference table like a storm rolling over calm waters. Netanyahu's ministers shifted in their seats, caught between fear and indignation, but none dared speak. Only Netanyahu tried to hold his ground, though even he seemed to lean back ever so slightly as Traoré approached. Traoré's voice dropped into a low, controlled intensity, one that didn't need volume to dominate the room. "Prime Minister," he said, "you speak of war as if it's a sport. You speak of enemies as if they're not children, mothers, and families. You shout, 'Stay out of our war,' but you never explain why your war keeps burying toddlers." A visible twitch crossed Netanyahu's face. "We fight terrorists," he insisted, though the words came out thinner than before. "You have no idea what we face." Traoré raised an eyebrow. "No idea?" Africa has known centuries of invasion, exploitation, and death funded by leaders who hid behind that same excuse. Terrorists. Threats. Security. Always the same lies, always followed by mass graves. You're not unique. A gasp rippled around the table. Netanyahu clenched his jaw. Traoré leaned in just a little more. "If you truly fought terrorists, the cemeteries wouldn't be filled with children. Every missile you fire is proof that your war is not on militants, it's on innocence itself." Netanyahu slammed his palm on the table. "You know nothing about Israel's struggle." Traoré didn't flinch. "But the world knows about yours. And it's children who pay your bills." Silence drowned the room. Even the guards exchanged glances. Netanyahu opened his mouth to fire back, but nothing came out. Traoré straightened his uniform and spoke with a final, cutting calm. "You didn't invite me here to listen. You invited me to be silent. But I don't silence myself for men who fear the truth they pretend to carry." The Israeli delegation looked shattered. The balance of power had flipped, suddenly, undeniably. The room went silent the moment Traoré stepped forward. Netanyahu's jaw clenched, his fingers tapping the podium as if trying to hold on to control he no longer had. The air between them crackled, not with diplomacy, but with a truth both men recognized. One of them ruled with bombs, the other with fearlessness. And fearlessness was winning. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calm was the kind that made generals rethink their strategies and presidents question their power. "You keep repeating the same line," Traoré said, his voice steady. "Your war. You're right. Your security. But tell me, since when does security mean turning hospitals to dust? Since when does right mean erasing children before they even learn to speak?" The camera zoomed in, catching every word. Every gesture. Every tremor in Netanyahu's forced composure. Netanyahu tried to laugh it off, a short, brittle sound. "You don't understand the region. Stay out of what you can't handle." But Traoré only smiled, cold, precise, devastating. "I understand enough to know this," he replied. "A leader who bombs children is not defending a country. He is destroying his soul." A murmur rippled through the hall. Even Netanyahu's own advisors shifted in their seats. "You say this is your war," Traoré continued, stepping closer, "but every bomb you drop pulls the world in. You want Africa silent. You want us obedient. But Africa sees you, clearly. And Africa does not fear you." Netanyahu's face darkened. "I won't take lectures from a soldier." Traoré nodded slowly. "Exactly, you're taking them from a man who buried soldiers. Men stronger than you. Men who didn't hide behind jets and excuses." Somewhere in the room, a microphone clicked. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "He really said that." Traoré leaned in just enough for Netanyahu to feel the weight of every word. "Stop killing children first," he said. "Then maybe the world will listen to you again. Until then, you've lost the right to speak of justice." It was the hardest blow yet, not shouted, not exaggerated, not wrapped in political theater. Just truth. And Netanyahu had no answer for truth. The room fell into a suffocating silence as Traoré stepped closer to Netanyahu, closing the distance with the calm, controlled confidence of a man who had seen war, survived it, and refused to fear those who hid behind artillery. Cameras zoomed in. Advisors stiffened. Even the bodyguards shifted, unsure of whether to intervene or simply witness history being rewritten in front of them. Netanyahu straightened his tie, trying to regain the upper hand, his voice breaking as he snapped, "Stay out of our conflict. This is Israel's war. We decide how to fight it." Traoré didn't blink. "You decide," he said, "but the world bleeds." His voice was soft, too soft. The kind of softness that carried danger. Every syllable hit like a hammer wrapped in velvet. "If this is your war," Traoré continued, "why are the children paying the price? Why do the mothers bury the consequences of your decisions? Why does every bomb you drop hit someone who never carried a weapon in their life?" Netanyahu's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the reporters gathering closer, sensing a moment the world would replay for years. He muttered, "Collateral damage happens. That's reality." Traoré's laugh was cold. "No," he said, stepping even closer. "That's cowardice. Reality is facing your enemy, not hiding behind civilians." Everyone froze. A ripple went through the room like a shockwave. Even American diplomats looked away. Netanyahu's face, once confident, now showed something he rarely displayed, uncertainty. He opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré didn't give him the chance. "You accuse Africa of staying out of your war?" Traoré said, voice rising just enough to shake the walls. "We stayed silent before. Not anymore. Not while you bomb the helpless and call it defense." Netanyahu finally snapped, "You think you can stop us? You think Africa can challenge Israel?" Traoré smiled, slowly, dangerously. "Israel?" he said. "I'm not speaking to Israel. I'm speaking to you." The distinction hit like a slap. And as Netanyahu swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how small the distance between them was, Traoré delivered the line that shattered the room. "You want us out of your war? Then stop killing children. Because the next time you don't, Africa will step in, whether you invite us or not." A buzz filled the room. Phones shook with notifications. Reporters whispered. Netanyahu froze completely, realizing he had finally met someone he couldn't intimidate with threats, missiles, or speeches. Netanyahu's breath tightened as Traoré returned to his seat, but the Israeli Prime Minister wasn't done. He slammed his palms onto the table, leaning forward until the microphones trembled. "You don't understand war," he growled. "You don't understand the enemies we face. You sit in your comfortable chair and judge us while we fight terrorists every single day." Traoré didn't move. Didn't blink. His stillness alone cut through the room like a blade. "Comfortable chair?" he repeated softly, almost amused. "Prime Minister, my country fought off France, mercenaries, and terrorists, all at the same time. And we didn't bomb children to do it." The room whispered, a ripple of discomfort Netanyahu couldn't stop. He jabbed a finger toward Traoré. "Don't you dare lecture me about morality. Israel is defending itself." Traoré lifted a single brow. "By killing toddlers? By striking refugee camps? By blowing up streets where mothers carry bread? If that is self-defense, then your definition is broken beyond repair." Netanyahu's jaw clenched. "You're out of your depth." Traoré finally leaned forward, voice dropping to a chilling calm. "You have drones. You have missiles. You have the backing of Washington. Yet you fear a soldier from Burkina Faso enough to shout across a table. Tell me, who is out of their depth?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the delegates aligned with Israel avoided eye contact. Traoré's words had pierced something deeper than politics, ego, pride, the illusion of untouchable power. Then Traoré delivered the line that shattered the room. You keep saying your war is justified. Fine. Then answer this: why do the bodies piling up look more like schoolchildren than soldiers? Netanyahu recoiled as if struck. Traoré didn't flinch. You want the world to stay out of your war? Traoré continued. Then stop making the world watch dead children. Because sooner or later, someone will stand up and say enough. And today, he tapped the table once, steady, controlled, that someone is me. The UN moderator froze, unable to speak. Cameras zoomed in. The world leaned closer. And Netanyahu, for the first time, had nothing to say. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire hall had already fallen into a suffocating silence, one so dense even Netanyahu felt it press against his throat. Cameras zoomed in. Phones tilted up. Staffers froze mid-step. What Traoré said next would not just echo, it would define the moment. He looked at Netanyahu like a man studying a failed leader, not a rival. Prime Minister, he said, the title sounding more like an accusation than a courtesy, every time the world asks you to stop killing children, you shout, war. Every time someone demands justice, you scream, security. And every time someone tells you the truth, you hide behind the word terrorism. Netanyahu's jaw clenched. His fingers curled into tight fists. Traoré stepped closer, not aggressively, but with the absolute confidence of a man who had never tasted fear. You tell us to stay out of your war, he continued. But the children you bomb are not your children. They belong to humanity. And humanity has every right to speak. The hall erupted in murmurs. Even diplomats who usually avoided taking sides exchanged glances, their eyes wide. Netanyahu opened his mouth to respond, but Traoré raised a hand, not to silence him, but to expose him. You want everyone silent, Traoré said, voice lowering to a razor-sharp whisper, because silence protects you. And you want Africa silent because you know Africa no longer fears you. Netanyahu's face reddened. For the first time, he didn't seem like the commander of a powerful military, he seemed like a man cornered by the truth. Traoré delivered the finishing blow. You can shout "stay out of our war" 1,000 times. But until you stop bombing children, the world will step in, one voice at a time. And the loudest voice today, he tapped his chest once, is Africa. The hall exploded into applause, unexpected, uncontrolled, unstoppable. Netanyahu remained frozen, staring at the man he had underestimated, and now feared. The room had become a battlefield without bullets, only words, only truth cutting sharper than steel. Netanyahu leaned forward, knuckles white against the polished table, trying to salvage whatever remained of his crumbling authority. You don't understand this region, he snapped, fighting to steady his wavering voice. This is about survival. Ours. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't shift. He didn't soften. He simply stared at the man across from him as if examining a lie that had lived too long. Survival, he repeated slowly, almost whispering, yet somehow, his voice filled the entire hall. You call it survival. The world calls it genocide. A murmur spread among the diplomats. Netanyahu's expression tightened, but Traoré continued, unmoved, unstoppable. You bomb homes, Traoré said. You flatten schools. You turn hospitals into rubble. And every time a child dies, you raise your hands and say, it wasn't us. But the world is watching. Africa is watching. And we do not close our eyes to the screams you try to silence. Netanyahu slammed a hand on the table. Stay out of this. You have no place in this war. Traoré leaned in, not aggressively, but with the gravity of a man who feared nothing. "I have a place," he said, voice steady as stone. "Because those children you bury under debris have a place in humanity. Because their lives matter. And because every leader who still has a conscience has a duty to speak." Silence fell again. Heavy. Charged. Uncomfortably honest. Traoré then pointed toward him, not accusing, but announcing. "You say I should stay out," he said calmly. "Then stop giving the world reasons to step in." A diplomat on Netanyahu's side inhaled sharply. Another lowered his gaze. For the first time that night, Netanyahu looked like a man who had lost control of the room, and knew it. "Your war," Traoré said, "is not just yours anymore. You made it the world's problem. And now the world demands an answer." The hall felt colder now, colder than when the argument began. Because Netanyahu finally understood something he had spent years avoiding, Traoré wasn't just criticizing him. He was exposing him. And exposure is what terrifies powerful men the most. Cameras zoomed in, officials leaned forward, and even his own allies shifted uncomfortably as Traoré stepped closer, voice steady, gaze unblinking. "Prime Minister," he said, tone almost gentle, "you keep shouting, 'Stay out of our war.' But every war you make spills over every border, fills every screen, and buries every child the world swears it will protect. And then you blame everyone except the man holding the match." Netanyahu opened his mouth, but Traoré didn't stop. "You claim security. Yet your bombs fall on children who cannot spell the word. You claim defense. Yet the only thing you defend is the illusion that no one sees what you're doing." Silence spread, heavy, suffocating. Traoré straightened his shoulders. "Let me ask you something. When a leader bombs civilians, destroys hospitals, and calls it strategy, what do you think the world sees? A victim?" He shook his head. "No. They see a man who has run out of arguments and uses fire because words have abandoned him." Netanyahu's jaw tightened. His advisors shifted, whispering frantic warnings, but he couldn't move, couldn't speak. Something in Traoré's tone froze him completely. "And you say Africa should stay out," Traoré continued. "But Africa has seen empires rise and collapse. Africa has been invaded, looted, rewritten. Yet Africa still stands. Can your conscience say the same?" A reporter snapped a photo, the flash like lightning between them. Traoré turned slightly, addressing the entire assembly. "If defending children makes us your enemy, then the world needs more enemies like us. If speaking truth makes you uncomfortable, then the discomfort is deserved. And if you demand silence." He looked Netanyahu dead in the eye. "Then you came to the wrong continent, the wrong century, and the wrong man." A quiet gasp rolled through the room. Netanyahu lowered his gaze, just for a second, but everyone saw it. "War does not make you strong," Traoré finished. "It only shows how weak you were before it started." The hall erupted, not with applause, but with the electric shock of truth landing exactly where it needed to. The room felt heavier now, as if every wall carried the echoes of the 9 rounds that came before. Cameras flickered. Advisors froze. Even Netanyahu, who had spent the entire meeting barking orders and justifying airstrikes, now looked like a man who sensed the end of his own script. But Traoré wasn't finished, he had saved the sharpest blade for last. He stood slowly, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on Netanyahu with a calmness that felt more dangerous than any shout. "You want to talk about war?" Traoré said, his voice steady, slicing through the tension. "You want to hide behind that word like it excuses everything?" He stepped forward. "War is soldiers fighting soldiers. What you're doing is something else entirely." Netanyahu stiffened, forcing a smirk. "You don't understand." Traoré raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't lie to me. Don't lie to the world. You said, 'Stay out of our war.' I am telling you now. What you call war is the murder of children who never held a weapon, never fired a bullet, never had the chance to live. The room fell dead silent. Even the lights seemed to dim. Then Traoré leaned in just enough for his words to land like a hammer. Your war ends when your excuses end. And today, your excuses are done. Netanyahu blinked, visibly shaken. His lips trembled, as if searching for a comeback that refused to come. Traoré straightened his uniform. You don't get to threaten innocence and call it defense. You don't get to command sympathy while you bury families. You don't get to keep killing and expect silence. He turned toward the cameras, making sure the world heard him clearly. If protecting children means confronting you, he said, then I'll confront you again. And again. And again, until no child fears the sound of your planes. Behind him, Netanyahu finally lowered his gaze. For the first time, he looked like a man who wasn't facing a politician, but a warrior who stood between him and the future he feared. Remember this, Traoré said as he walked away. History is already choosing its side. And it's not yours.